Evening all.
Konnichiwa, good Abend, willkommen et bienvenue, everybody. Thanks for joining us. Sorry, a bit of a late start there. We were busy sharing stories of cat food and dog behaviour, so obviously highly related. And a giant welcome to everybody to the February, I forgot what month it was then, to the February PowerPlatform Virtual Happy Hour. And this evening we are joined by Mark Cunningham and Mike Ochs, better known as Mike Factorial to me anyway, that's how I remember him. And we're hoping for a fairly lively discussion around ALM. So thanks for joining us. Just to kick off the call, have we got the rules of engagement, Carlos?
You should have. Sorry, am I not showing?
No, it is showing. I think it's me. I think I'm a bit laggy.
Okay.
She said.
But that's quite normal for you. Like
that's
just in the concept of existence.
Yes, yeah. It is my way. I don't know what's going on. I think it's my internet. So apologies if I'm lagging. Code of conduct. We do absolutely like to adhere to a code of conduct, which is to be respectful of other people and their opinions, and to understand that not everybody agrees with you, and that's totally okay. And it's okay for you not to agree with other people, and you're more than welcome to disagree, but always do it respectfully, and be patient and allow people to speak freely, and they will allow you to speak freely. And we don't tolerate any kind of bad behavior. And if you see or hear anyone say something that you think is unbecoming of anyone in this community or in this session, then please highlight it to me, or highlight it to Chris or Carl if it's me, because let's be honest, if somebody says something wrong, it's going to be me. It normally is. But we want this to be a welcoming space for everybody, and we want to hear everybody's opinions. So you mustn't be afraid to share your opinions, but please be respectful of others. That's all we would say. Please keep muted. You're more than welcome to have your camera on, but please keep muted and raise your hand if you have a question, or put it in the chat. Carlos moderates the chat, so he will point out anything that's very exciting going on over there. So without too much further ado, I would love it if Mark and Mike, if you could give us a brief introduction about yourselves. Perhaps you'd like to go first, Mark, and tell us what's your name and where'd you come from?
Yeah, good evening all. Hopefully you can hear me all right. Mark Cunningham here. I've been working really as a software engineer, and I transitioned really into DevOps. Some call it ALM. I'm just call it DevOps. I think it is encompassing everything that we do. But yeah, I've been doing this, 17 years now. And I started off with a full head of hair. And that's fun. And I think that's a sign of the battles and the fun and the journey that I've had along the way. But yeah, I've been doing a lot of work around Power Platform in the last 4 or 5 years. My current assignment, I'm working a lot with big data and Synapse. I'm actually doing stuff with data lakes and exporting data. So it's an interesting world.
Very cool. And what's one fun fact about you that nobody would guess that you're willing to share in a public forum?
Yes, so I don't know if you know, I'm a twin. I'm an identical twin. So my brother has got even less hair than me. So, I've got like 2 hairs. So if you see me in the street, you know it's me. If he's got absolutely no hair, it's my brother. There's your fact.
Has he got like a Homer Simpson, like just a jagged line all the way around the back of his head?
Yeah, pretty much.
We're going to need pictures. So thanks for that. Appreciate that. Didn't know you were a twin. That is a fun fact. And Mike, would you like to share a bit about yourself?
Sure. So I've been doing Power Platform since it was CRM 3.0. So it's been a very long time, a very long journey. I worked for a partner for about 13 years. And then I joined Aidan Cascella, who's a fellow MVP, after he started up a consulting business up here in DC. And I've been doing that ever since. And most recently, I've been working with the PowerCat team on the Center of Excellence work that they're doing for the ALM accelerators. and I've been doing that for about a year and a half. And I think Mark is on the line as well. Mark is with PowerCat as well. And yeah, so do I need to share a fun fact about myself?
Please.
Okay.
Not hair related.
Do I have to demonstrate? Because I can.
Yes.
I can make farting noises with my eye.
No, you don't need to. Yeah,
Oh,
I want to see that. Yes, I want to see that.
I don't know if it'll. I don't know if you'll be able to hear it on camera, but hold on, let me try. Okay.
Squelchy one.
Oh, it's so juvenile. I love it.
Oh,
the kids love it.
That might be my new favorite thing. Very, very keen on that. That's awesome. Thanks very much. Thanks very much, Mike. So I guess what we would probably want to do is maybe start off with a bit about ALM, what it is, where it comes from, how it started, how it's going, and what the future is. So whichever one of you guys would like to kick off that discussion, please feel free.
Sure. Yeah. So I like to describe ALM, well, application lifecycle management. We should define it. But specifically, what I guess we're focused on is sort of the development inner loop and the development outer loop, right? So we're not talking about necessarily planning, the whole DevOps, sprint planning and things like that. We're just talking about being able to take a piece of software, an app that somebody builds, a flow that somebody builds, iterate in development on that, test, make sure that it's working, and then ultimately push that into a downstream environment and share it with other people. So the ultimate goal is take that work, share it with other people, but also at the same time, source control it so that you have sort of a revision history of it. And that's essentially, I think, what we're dealing with. But there are other areas, and I'm sure, Mark, at your organization, you guys are doing other things related to ALM. But I think that's the sort of high level where we're focused anyway with the with the ALM accelerator stuff that I've been working on. But there are other areas, configuration, things like that have to go on. So I'd like to get Mark's.
Yeah, Mark, what? Anything to add?
Yeah, no, just extending on that. So that covers, I would say, 70% of the story that we see, but ALM is integral really to modern delivery. If you're not doing ALM, there's a chance that you're not really releasing frequently, or you're not really adding value at the rate that people are demanding.
Okay, like what do you both see as the future of it, or what do you think you would change or improve on, or which direction would you like to see it going? Because I'm not sure that it has. It's definitely like a hot button topic at the moment, but I'm not sure if it's gathered enough momentum at this point. Where would you like to see it go?
Yeah, I mean, with relation to PowerPlatform, I would like it to be really easy. Unfortunately, it is not right now, and I think that's the amount of, compared to regular sort of .NET application lifecycle management and sort of the code first ALM that's out there and has been out there for a while and is pretty well hardened at this point. PowerPlatform is still in sort of its infancy. PowerPlatform, not necessarily Dynamics. People who are been doing Dynamics development since, like I said, 15 years ago, that's in a pretty good place at this point. But the PowerPlatform is still very much, it's a heavy lift to get started with at this point. So I would like to see it be a lot easier than it is, and I'm sure a lot of people would as well.
What do you think would make it easier?
I think so a lot of the components of the PowerPlatform kind of grew up outside of on their own, right? So you had the ability with Power Apps to export an MS app file, and you could import that downstream. Same thing with Flow. You could export them as JSON, import them downstream. But as things started to kind of gel together and glue together, and Dataverse, became sort of the platform under everything, it's now at a point where all of those components are having to get on the same page, and that page is solutions, right? And things started to be brought into the solutions now from PowerPlatform, and now there's hiccups along the way, and it's different products having to, or different technologies having to interact with each other, and so I think solutions are the key, and I think that once that sort of stabilizes and is normalized in the Power Platform all up, right? Everything, Power BI, then we'll be in a better place than we are right now.
Chris, go for it before we move on to Mark.
Yeah, actually, it's more of a statement. And Mike, you said something interesting there. I think in the world of ALM, and believe me, I'm no ALM expert. I mean, I just know how to use a solution, and that's the best I can do, man. But the ultimate thing is that I think people have always associated ALM with code, and always said, hey, we're going to have a ton of code, and we're going to do stuff with this code. And the moment you spoke about like all these little bits and pieces that live outside of the platform, and you're right, it's like herding cats into the same place. And what we found is that, like, the moment I talk to an organization about code, about ALM, they make the assumption, I'm giving you a crutch shot. They make the assumption I'm talking about like moving an app. And it's so much bigger than that, isn't it? And I guess to both of you, are you finding that with organizations now? You're going in there and they're like, oh, we can move a Canvas app, and everyone cheers. But actually the concept of ALM is just much, much larger than that.
Yeah, definitely. I'd agree with that. I think that where it's going, because I think you touched on that question, Alison. Where's it going? Is we're going to a world of talk about things like GitOps. So now you're automating all your business processes as well, and that's it's like an ALM, but it goes so much wider than that. It goes so much further. So it's about efficiency and automating these things that just are so costly to have people doing manually. It just makes no sense anymore. And to touch on the area that we could improve on, and certainly that's something that I was going to just mention, what I really like about Azure, just from my journey, was that they have very much an API first approach. So if there's any gaps in the tooling, you can actually hit an API and you can build around that. Whereas with the Power Platform, that hasn't always been an option, especially around Power BI. You've been asking for, if there was only an API for that, I could build a connector to get around it. So having an API first approach is the way forward, and I think that should be the de facto way.
Interesting, because like Chris said, he doesn't, he's not an ALM expert, and I know even less than Chris. I know how to spell it, and that's about it. But the thing where I see it being useful is, and I think I mentioned this to both of you guys separately, that like I can see for citizen developers where they have not come from a development background and they may build something and they may go, this is fantastic, I think other people can use this, but then they have no concept of how to get that into the environment for everybody to use, right? So I feel like there's massive value for the Power Platform side there. But from my journey to try and learn about ALM, bearing in mind I don't come from a dev background, so I look at this probably in a similar way to how a citizen developer would. It's really, I don't understand it, and it's very difficult for me to get to grips with it. I'm just about clinging on to my fingernails with DevOps at the best of times. So like, I think, is there something that can be done to make it much more accessible for those citizen developers, or for the people that don't come from a development background? Like, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, and I think that goes back to solutions first, right? Like being able to take a package, export it, and import it, and have everything in a working state in a downstream environment. That's the more accessible way of doing things, rather than getting Azure DevOps involved, having to deal with source code and pull requests and all of those, things that, a maker that really doesn't want to be able to do. If they can hand off a zip file to their sort of deployment manager, then that's the easiest way to do it. But that means that everything has to be in place in that environment in order for that to work. And there's a lot of, connections, for example, are a great example of that. Like you can't package up a connection and deploy that. Somebody has to go in and create those connections in that deployment environment. So, getting to that solution first, everything packaged together, push it out, I think makes sense from a maker's perspective more than, the sort of advanced ALM scenario.
Like, I know one of the things that we talked about briefly in discussing the subject was like the different challenges that you come across in different project sizes. And I think like we've also touched on previously when we spoke about this, the difference between doing this at an enterprise level and doing it on like much smaller projects. What have been the biggest challenges that you have seen, and which of those scenarios present, like I'm sure they both present challenges, which of those challenges are the worst challenges to overcome with people, would you say?
Yeah, so I can talk a bit on this one because I've seen a wide range of different characteristics, but certainly you get people with different skill sets, different backgrounds, and trying to get a tool to cater for that is challenging. On our projects, we use a tool called Development Hub, and what that does, it aims to lower the friction, so you can move your solutions, you can move things without having to touch Azure DevOps, without having to touch Git necessarily. So that's one way we've tried to almost lower the bar so that it's not a scary thing. But going further than that, as you say, I mean, there's such a wide range of projects. No two projects are the same. But the ultimate aim is you're trying to almost make the inner development loop as efficient as you can, while not having to expect everyone to be an expert in these tools and technologies, because there is a lot to learn, and we wouldn't pretend otherwise.
Yeah, I think there's also, environments. Like environments are really costly in the Power Platform, and for a smaller project, you're probably not going to have a lot of storage to spin up new environments for new development work. And in a large organization, they may have that ability, but in a smaller organization, you can't assume that everybody's working in their separate development environments and they've got different downstream environments from stage to UAT to production to whatever it may be. I think that is a bit of a blocker, is just the cost of being able to to do the things that smaller organizations want to do, and but it can't do it just because they don't have the number of licenses, or they don't have the the capacity.
Like, do you really who is this intended to benefit most, a big company or a small company? Like
ALM.
Yeah.
I think it varies, right? It's more about the size of the project. Well,
Okay.
maybe not, because if you're delivering, if you're an ISV, you could be a small ISV, but you're delivering, your solution regularly on a regular cadence, and you're trying to, push things through automated testing and making sure there's quality gates in place and pushing it out to your, to your users. You need ALM, right? Even if you're, a 10-person shop, but, for larger organizations, they need it because of, like Mark was talking about, governance and, and things like that.
I think there's a good point there about the size of the project, though. So you've got all these small citizen apps that are just doing very simple, straight to production, virtually things that you're going on, maybe a flow or whatever. I don't see them needing the ALM tooling that we're talking about, but it's when those things start to get complicated and you need that dev, test, prod cycle that this starts to get more and more needed. I don't see it really fitting in those productivity apps that, at the lower end of the scale.
Yeah, I think, but it depends on the size of the organization, right? If you've got 100,000 people developing apps, you absolutely need ALM to keep control of that process. You need a single point at which things go through, and there's approvals in place and things like that, and security considerations and things like that as well, that you can all sort of check as they're being pushed into different environments or being pushed out to other users. But there is still the, to your point, Carl, there is still the shops, the small shops, they're building, and the individuals building productivity apps, they don't need ALM, right? They're just building it for themselves. They may share it with another person, and then if it goes viral, then it becomes sort of an app that's being shared throughout the organization, you may need to invest in ALM at that point.
Mark has his hand up. Go for it.
And so I think there is a big white space in between, right? From the person who doesn't need ALM and the person who does, where sort of a lightweight step up on the path to much more complicated ALM is, we've learned from customers. I mean, just by introduction, I'm Mark Schweigert. I work with Mike. I'm on the Power Customer Advisory team at Microsoft, and I've been doing ALM on what we now call the Power Platform since at least 11, 12 years now. And so I've grown up with the platform warts and all. And so I would say first and foremost, like everything that everyone's saying, all the pain points, all the commentary and the channels I can certainly relate to. But back to the point, we've learned that there is this sort of white space where some people just want to be able to go from I'm developing in production, right, for something over a Canvas app over Excel that doesn't need ALM, right, to maybe something that's shared with 10, 15 people over a SharePoint list that probably still doesn't need ALM, is perfectly fine in the default environment, to then evolving the whole life cycle of your own application to increase in complexity and then feeling like you do need ALM, and starting with sort of deployment automation, right? And not going to this level of taking dependency on source control integration and CI/CD and like team development and all these more advanced ALM things. And so much like everything in the Power Platform, one of the things that we're learning is that there's this continuum of all these things that start from very simple, entry level scenarios, if you will, to the full complexity of what those of us who have lived in the Dynamics world for years know that the platform is capable, right? And it is not one size fits all for every one of the personas on that spectrum. And while can't talk a lot of detail, I think one of the things I will say is a lot of these challenges are actually really well understood. To your point, Chris, I mean, I've been in some of the emails that you sent back in the day, and some of them that you still send, right? These problems are really well understood, and it's been a bit challenging internally to figure out what to prioritize on first, right? Because it's a lot of work to get this spectrum right. But it is certainly an area that there's a lot of mind share and energy around internally. And while the finer details of that will come out over the course of the next few release notes, if you will, right? There is a lot of energy around this. And the pain points and the commentary I'm hearing at least make me feel good that the areas that are being focused on are good areas. And that's about as explicit as I can be at this point.
Yeah, that's fair. There's a couple of other points I want to come to, but there's some questions in the chat that I also want to highlight. So Ian Connolly says, when you're working in an organization where there are many projects ongoing with many developers, consultants, makers adding fields and customizations to the Dataverse forms, how best to implement ALM for deployments when the changes in dev environment are at different stages, some ready for deployment, others not, but dependable on table forms? Oh, that's a great question. Yeah, cool.
When you figure it out, let us know. No.
I'd love to hear how other people are doing it, because I certainly can relate to all the challenges, right? And some of the practices that seem unnatural that many of us have to do to address those problems. But I'd love to hear how other people are doing it.
Yeah, I mean, I've not worked on large, I wouldn't say large development teams in Power Platform, right? I've worked on groups of 4 to 5 people. And it's always been, there's coordination involved, and we're working from a single development environment. We're not working from our separate, development environments. I think I've discussed that with projects I've been on, and we all decided that was not a good idea. But then you run into the issues with like stepping on each other's plugins as well as tables and stuff like that. And what, to your point, like release flags feature flagging things and not getting things out, if they're half baked, it's a hard problem. And it still is today. I think there needs to be something behind solutions that provides more visibility into, and this is kind of leading myself, but provides more visibility and capability to view all of the components at once and view the changes that have been made, which is source control. And to be honest, source control is not fantastic when you unpack a solution. There's all kinds of noise in there, and you can't necessarily tell who made what change when. But I think source control is the way forward with that, because then you'll be able to see individual commits. Joe updated this field at this time. We don't have any of that. We've never had any of that in the solution, history to see who made updates and when. And my guess is that source control is going to be the source control first and is going to be the solution. And it kind of is today, but the whole unpack process is slow, and it's a bit of a lift.
Yeah, so one approach to that is going for the multi-environments. As you mentioned, that brings its own challenges, but you can scale, but you don't move away from the challenge of eventually you have to merge this back into a shared environment, right? And that's been my bugbear with the platform, right? Not in a bad way, but wouldn't it be great if you could version solution components and you could have multiple versions active at the same time? Because then you could get around that problem. You could say, I'm working on version 2 of this entity. Mike's working on version 1. Problem solved. We can coexist, but we're not there yet. That isn't an option. So I think until it is, the best granular way, as you say, Mike, source controlling that is one way, but environment-centric approach really becomes the norm. We've got on one project, we've got to a stage where you create a feature branch and it actually spins you up an entire environment just for you, right? So you're totally isolated away from anyone else. The challenge doesn't go away of how do you integrate that back in though, right? That's always going to be the problem.
Yeah, Mark, did you still have your hand up, or? That's okay. No worries.
It is a new hand raise. So Chris and so Mark, I agree with you, right? Like, there are real challenges to making what you've described work today. And so there aren't real good answers to those challenges. Like every approach that you take has compromises, right? If you take a shared dev environment approach, you lose traceability to who did what. And every time you commit to a source control system, right, it's just the aggregate of all the work in the entire environment in your solution, right? Contained in your solution, but for the entire environment, no matter who did it, right? If you go developer isolation, which actually is possible, it's extremely hard to do. And very few people are successful with it, because ultimately, when you do developer isolation, you're actually merging at the Git level. And there's two aspects of this discussion. One is our documentation still says that certain files aren't supported to merge at the Git level. Yet, you look at the Canvas team who've been blogging about and talking about Canvas code where they're encouraging people to merge at the Git level, right? So we have contradictions in our own platform. But the second thing is that right now, the file formats are really hard to merge at the Git level because they have all sorts of date timestamps and other things that are metadata about your customizations, but they're not really the scoped down thing that you've done, right? And so merging at the file level is really difficult. And then the whole concept of building it back into a package that will successfully deploy in a downstream environment. Like, these are all real problems that are, unfortunately, there aren't real good solutions to. But so I'm just sort of commenting on the point that you made. But Chris, and I think somebody else was making a really interesting and a point that about Dataverse, right? And Dataverse environments and needing Dataverse environments for ALM. So this is where my comment in the chat said, please don't shoot the messenger, but I will represent the point of view from Microsoft, right? So the ALM engine for the Power Platform is solutions, hard stop, right? We have legacy import export, but all the investment in ALM has gone into solutions, right? And all the investment going into improving the ALM experience in the Power Platform is going into solutions, right? Which Chris then brings up the point that you made, but I don't want Dataverse in my environment, right? This is a tough one because imagine a world where the solution engine wasn't, from a marketing and branding perspective, called part of Dataverse, right? It was just the ALM engine in the Power Platform, right? Just like ARM, Azure Resource Manager, is both the definition, right, and the engine in Azure for provisioning infrastructure in Azure, right? If that were the case, then this whole discussion about Dataverse would be irrelevant because all it is the ALM engine of the platform, right? Would you agree with that?
Yeah.
The challenge is the ALM engine from the platform came from Dynamics, right? Which came, Dataverse came from Dynamics. It came from Dataverse, and we never sort of separated that, right? So the engine lives inside of Dataverse, which is much more than a database or a data service. It's a lot more, right? And so this creates a lot of confusion. Now, technically, you don't have to pay for licenses, et cetera. You do have to have enough storage to provision an environment, right? But then not use Dataverse at all. And the aspiration is that for the parts of the engine, the ALM engine, right, you don't need premium licenses to use that. And in fact, even with things like connection references and environment variables, because again, the platform needs a data store for our own orchestration, and that is Dataverse, because we're not going to reinvent the wheel, right? So Dataverse is the engine. Connection references, environment variables live in Dataverse, regardless of whether you use Dataverse as your backend data store, right? The challenge right now that we need to solve is, one, the branding, the licensing confusion, but two, the reality is that there are still edge cases where that's hard. So for example, Flow, you can use connection in a Flow, you can use environment variables, right? Without needing to use the Dataverse connector, right? But from a Canvas app, if you use environment variables, you have to use the Dataverse connector, which is a premium connector, right? Or go through a Flow, right? There's no native PowerFX way to access environment variables. And so unintentionally, there is this unintended consequence that you have to, use Dataverse as a data source in people's minds, right? When it really, the goal is connection references, environment variables, all things ALM related are not premium features, right? They are features that, yes, you have to have a Dataverse engine provisioning the environment to leverage, but is really there to serve SharePoint ALM, Canvas app ALM, Dynamics ALM, et cetera. And we have to untangle that story because it's still not clean and it's very confusing for people. I would be the first one to recognize that. But the other thing is, the first point I made, we haven't done a good job making that hard statement. Dataverse solutions, hard stop, are the ALM engine for the platform now and moving forward, and that's where all the investment is going.
And that's where I was going with it, Mark, because I think that people make the assumption that when you use Dataverse, it's for data storage, and it's not. And I think Mark made the point around an environment-centric approach, right? Like, one of the key things that I found is that, for me, Dataverse in every environment by default, every single time. And I like the fact that you guys have spoken about the solutions piece and and I know it's hard to split it out, but that's what I was hoping to kind of bring out in the discussion, is that Dataverse doesn't mean that you have to put data in it. It means that you get this operational governance layer that allows you to use solutions. And that's really cool, right? So yeah, thanks for answering that. And I hope everyone got that, because you don't need a premium license to use solutions. Okay.
You just need the storage to provision an environment, right? Okay, that's cool. There's a couple of comments in the chat that I probably want to come back to as well. Like Phil Cole said he would love to see simplification of technologies, AXML workflows, C# plugins, JS web resource, JSON flow, PowerFX, Canvas apps, and more. To do a PR, you have to know a lot. Please kill XAML first. Comments, thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, that kind of goes back to what I was talking about. When you unpack a solution, it's a whole gnarly mess of stuff, as Phil said. And it's also not it's not very suited for source control, unfortunately. Things get shuffled in different orders, so you can end up with things that look like changes, but or they were looks like a deletion up here, but it was actually added again down below. Yeah, I would agree with you wholeheartedly there, Phil. I thought there was another good question about so solutions. We've got code and customizations.
Yeah, from Simon
And-
Hetzel. Yeah.
Yeah,
Sorry.
and that's a good one. Right, like the issue. So he's saying, we get the code, we get customizations, we can put web resources and stuff like that in the solution, and we can put all our flows and stuff. But where's all that configuration data live? And like Microsoft internally or in their solutions have been using, solution aware entities for a while, right? Like some of the entities that the native solutions use also, push rows downstream when you push a solution. So, everybody who's customizing Dataverse has been waiting for that technology to be available, so we don't have to use tools like deployment configuration tool and stuff like that. But also, there's other stuff that goes along with that. When I was talking about you can't ship a connection, right? So you can't hook up a connection reference in the downstream environment because the solution doesn't know what connection to use. Some of the tooling gets around that. So you can use Pack CLI now, and you can use the Azure DevOps tools to do that and kind of feed that information through a config file. But again, you have to have somewhere to house that configuration information, and generally it would be in a source control repository. But it's fair feedback that if there's these other assets that need to get a solution into a working state downstream, then that should all probably be part of the solution itself instead of a few assets on the side.
Mauro replied to that comment in the chat saying they use a configuration migration wizard and export it with a paired solution. That way they can always map a solution and reference data from DevOps, which sounds good to me.
Yep.
Moving into a slightly different direction, like with the view to like how much using ALM is changing the game and speeding things up, what's the knock-on effect for stuff like testing and things like that? Mark?
It's huge. It's the biggest pain point you're going to find when you move into this world, right? So ALM, you're trying to organize chaos, right? You're trying to keep the doors of hell from opening. But then you suddenly solve that you sort of solve that problem, and then you're into the kind of the release, and you're sort of saying, well, how am I going to test this now? You see, you don't want to become the bottleneck. That's the one thing you don't want to do. So you start having to shift left. You have to start saying, well, actually, part of your story, being a developer now, is actually putting on your tester hat, shifting left, and actually thinking about how you're going to test this thing early, like build your automation tests. And we've had huge success. That's one of the areas we've seen huge success in personally, was that we took this mentality of we're going to shift left, we're going to catch the problems early, and when we go live, it's going to be a no drama show. There's going to be no stress. We know it's going to work because all the way through our environments, we've got the exact same process. Nothing, no human could get in the way of making this work unless you've got some really bad luck and something unforeseen happens. But yeah, going live is pretty much a no drama for us anymore. Or unlike it used to be, where we had manual testers, you'd have days of UAT, someone will be waiting there to press the button. Those days will eventually start coming to an end.
Mark, what are you guys using as far as test automation technology? What technologies are you guys using?
Yeah, so we built a few libraries. We're using PowerApp SpecFlow bindings, which is a SpecFlow wrapper on top of Easy Repro. So one of the biggest challenges if you've tried to do test automation with Easy Repro is it's very code centric, right? It's all C#, and a lot of the bindings are not natural for, functional consultants, for example. They're not going to write C#, but you give them some plain English SpecFlow or Gherkin syntax, there's a high chance they're going to pick that up and they'll be able to reuse that and translate that. So that's the human side to the problem. We also do integration testing, because the challenge with doing acceptance testing or UI testing alone is you can only test so much of the platform, right? You can't see all the fields. What if the field is in the back end and you can't get to it through a web driver? So yeah, we use a library which I built called Fluid Test, which is actually designed to test any Azure component. It isn't just for Power Platform. You can test really complex architectures end to end. Yeah, recently I did something with the Azure Synapse, which proved that that library was flexible to do that sort of thing. And yeah, we've got full test automation pretty much end to end.
Cool. Mike, anything to add to that?
No, I want to talk to Mark more. I want Mark to talk more about testing. So no, but that is interesting because right, none of that is, well, I guess for you did say easy repro. So, but really a lot of none of that was Power Platform tools, right? That you're using. It's standard, .NET developer type tooling, and I think there's definitely a gap in the platform, where when it comes to testing, and what you were talking about, the gherkin tests and things like that, getting that helps get it to the level of a maker, and or at least a consultant instead of a developer, and that's really cool.
Cool. I'm seeing a lot of comments from.
Just to answer that, Alison, that Mark's question in the chat, there was an awful lot of this is open source, but we can put you two guys together and we'll talk.
Yeah, it's all on GitHub, so I can quickly share that.
Yeah.
So it's all publicly available on NuGet or GitHub. We've fully open sourced all of these libraries, so you can use them today. You can, after this session, you can even play out if you're that cool. You want to go for it, go for it. But yeah, everything's available.
So
The only problem is it's got that Capgemini name on it, so you might want to take that off.
Sorry, Paul.
Yeah.
So the reason I ask is it's sort of as a part of what Mike and I do at Microsoft and the Power Customer Advisory team is we're part of the team that builds the COE starter kit, right? And we are absolutely unafraid of using community tools to help us get our job done, right? If that's the most pragmatic way to solve the problem and help other people, solve the problem as well, because a lot of people look at our repo. And so I would love to learn more about the kind of stuff that you guys are doing, Mark, as frankly a stopgap for us to use selfishly until the product has more native solutions to solve these problems, right? And again, I will say again that all these problems are certainly understood. They're conversations that Mike and I have with internal product group folks every day pretty much, because we live and breathe ALM the same way you do. We don't have any secret sauce. We don't have any magic internal tools, right? We have to go live and breathe the same pain that you do to make some of these things work, right? And so I'd love to learn more. Thanks, Mark.
Yeah, and I think just for context, for those who don't know what the COE Starter Kit is, it's not a Microsoft product. It's a product, or it's a set of tools that are built by PowerCat on the platform. So, and when Mark says we can use, if we're using third-party stuff, it's because it's out of necessity for us, because there are product gaps that we have influence to fill, right? Like Mark can go back to the product team and say, hey, there's a gap here, but the PowerCat team isn't necessarily the ones fixing those things, but the PowerCat team works with Microsoft's largest customers to help them adopt the Power Platform, and the tooling kind of came out of that. So showing these customers how to do things, regardless of whether it's in the platform or outside the platform, is the goal of the PowerCat team. So, but that's really cool, Mark. I'd love to see that too.
Yeah, it really, just as a side note, it really encourages me when I see people taking ideas from people in community, right? And let's not reinvent the wheel. If somebody's got something that's working, then I think that's fantastic. It's nice to see that. Moving on to citizen developers, how do you see the ALM tools helping to enable citizen developers more, or to help them to achieve more, or to maybe, I don't know, I don't think it's ever going to bridge the gap between professional developers and citizen developers, but how do you think it's how do you think it's going to enable the citizen developers to do more?
I think I said this sort of at the beginning. ALM is a topic that people have either heard of, are doing or know they need, but don't know what it is, right? Like, I think citizen developers realize that they need some way to do what ALM provides for them, and that is share broadly the stuff that they're building, and share it more rapidly. So I think that those are the two things that ALM will provide, and if it's a user-friendly and maker-friendly sort of ALM process, then there's going to be higher adoption, all up in the organization of things. There's going to be better productivity, throughout the organization because people are building these tools and distributing them, in a tested and fashion. So that's sort of my thoughts on that. How ALM.
Yeah, I share that, Mike. I think you're targeting the inner development loop, as you mentioned earlier. So for those of you who don't really know what that means, the inner development loop is the day-to-day stuff that you do to try to do your job. And it's about simplifying that, making that frictionless, making that as easy as you can without having to reskill again and have to learn all these things.
So how would you say then that ALM differs for citizen developers compared to pro developers?
Probably the range of tooling that they would use, I would say. So, but for people like myself and others on the call, we would probably hit the whole stack. We would know Git, we would know Azure DevOps inside out. We'd even know the APIs. We'd probably know it to such a low level. But the truth is, if you're just trying to build apps, that's the question. Do you really need to have that knowledge, or can tooling bridge that gap? And the answer is tooling should be able to bridge that gap. And that's our aim as a community. We need to make that the #1 priority for everybody.
Yeah, and I think when you get to a point where you've got resources outside that won't ever be in a solution too, like that's when a professional developer is probably going to get involved in the ALM process, because if you've got a bunch of Azure resources out there that your solution relies on, that have to be spun up, then somebody's gonna have to build the bicep templates to deploy that stuff, and you're gonna have to incorporate that into your Azure DevOps pipelines along with deploying your solution. So I think that's the point at which there's a separation and source code, right? Like a maker doesn't necessarily want to or care about source code, but a developer does, and they're going to want to go look at what the changes have been. If they screw something up in their development environment, they may want to just go repack that solution, import it again, or look at the line of code that changed. So I think maybe that's the separation. But in that last case, I think makers would want to be able to do that if they had an easy way to do it as well, without looking at source code. XAML.
Chris, you had thoughts?
Yeah, this is okay. So like, I don't agree that the tooling is always going to fix it, and I'll tell you why. If you look at a proper environment-centric approach where you've got like specific environment, so let's just use like personal productivity in default, right? So you can disable app sharing. The role might not persist, but you can do that. Okay, we know that. And that's only with Dataverse security roles. It won't work without Dataverse. Fine. So Karen decides she's going to build this really kick-ass app on top of her, God forbid, spreadsheet, potentially SharePoint list. And she does that, yeah. And now 5 people want to use her app. She goes to Todd and Ted and Tim and Tony. It's like, hey, dudes, look at my app. And they're like, sick. But defaults has got sharing turned off. And you've got now 500,000 apps in default. How do you know to move that? And like, this is where I think there's a parallel between governance and guidance, right? Like governance is the hardcore stuff and operations that allows you to move. But the guidance is, hey, Karen, go and check out this document, right? Go to this place. If you want to be able to move your solution so other people can access it, here's how you do it. But then now think about that, right? Because I think a lot of the time we get stuck on the pro dev and we don't think enough about the citizen to advanced maker. If you're looking at a set of environments where you've got like different buckets, so medium complexity, high complexity, and then all those are split between hundreds of business units. Let's talk about 900,000 people using PowerPlatform, just throwing a number out. That's a lot of automation for stuff that's deceivingly simple. So like, I don't know, and I know solutions are the right thing to do from a pro dev perspective, but when looking at citizen to advanced maker, I just think that there's potentially a gap there, and I don't know personally how to solve it. I know that the manual way is to export and import, but if anyone's got ideas, hey, like, I would 100% love to hear them. I hope that makes sense. That's a lot of words.
It made sense to me,
Yeah.
but like, you know, I don't think I'm necessarily the target market here either. So, Mark, you had your hands up also. You'd like to.
So, Chris, I think that made a heck of a lot of sense to me, right? Now, I'll go back to the statement I made about this concept of a continuum, right? Because even in this discussion, we're talking about makers and citizen developers in one box and pro devs in another box, as if those are the only two boxes that exist. And in fact, they are, I would submit that they are the wrong boxes to put people in, because the platform enables everybody from the power user who understands PowerPoint and Excel concepts to the pro developer, right, to join the party. And that's that challenge, unique challenge, I think, of this platform in terms of that continuum that I'm talking about, right? And I think that if the chasm between citizen developer, or whatever term you want to use, low code person, right? Because I'm not a big fan of citizen developer or pro dev. I prefer low code and code first, right? Because that's about the activity you're doing versus, you know, some box that you're putting people in, right? And so, and I'm not nitpicking on people's choice of words. That's just my preference of words, right? But if the chasm between, you know, new to low code, right, and code first for ALM adoption exists, and you don't have a continuum, then people are always going to be stuck in those boxes and in those difficult situations, right? But if there's a mechanism, and philosophically, this is how, you know, we just candidly, we think about improving the platform, is if there's a mechanism to start with, like, you know, very basic, easy button stuff, and eventually over time go to the further end. That's kind of how where we aspirationally want to go with ALM. Now, that's all like high level gobbledygook, right? But let me bring it to concrete. I have so many conversations with people, start off as Canvas developers, right? Said, I'm not a developer, I'm a citizen developer. They put themselves in a box, right? But before you know it, they're building more and more complex Canvas apps. And they're getting comfortable with connectors. Then they're getting comfortable with model-driven apps. Then they're getting comfortable with Dataverse. Before you know it, they're writing Azure functions. They're literally writing C# code, right? And the platform itself is an on-ramp to all sorts of new personas to become what we historically call some semblance of a professional developer or a code-first developer, right? And that's what I mean by continuum, right? Being able to create that same kind of experience that I just articulated. There are real stories of real people in the platform today, right? But with ALM. And so to me, that's aspirationally where we need to go. Now, you pointed out solutions, and are solutions the right thing or not? And I think we can certainly debate that, right? But to me, for solutions to be the right thing, there has to be many less paper cuts in using solutions, right? Because a citizen developer or a code-first person who just picks up solutions breaks themselves into jail 99% of the time because of dependencies and all these other things, right? So if we can solve those things, would you agree that if we can solve those things, then solutions seem like a more reasonable thing, right? Because if you solve those things, then solutions are approachable, right? And then I'll extend it one, and I'll let you answer, but I'll extend it one more thought. If you actually look at how Dataverse for Teams works, you don't start with solutions, right? You just build a bunch of stuff, right? And then when you go to export, or, you know, what we think of as export, like you want to move your app to a downstream environment, we don't even really talk about solutions, right? We just sort of manifest a solution for you that has all the stuff you need in it to import into your next Dataverse for Teams environment, right? So if we can create simplicity on top of the solutions infrastructure, right, then it can offer a continuum from here to there. The problem is, in the real world today, we don't have that, right? And that's where we need to get to, in my mind.
Yeah, I'm with you, man. So I agree with it, and it was a baited question. I think that yeah, I like the fact that you just said they break themselves into jail. Oh, no, but you're right. I mean, I just think that, you know, as much as DFT infuriates me, I think that the actual packaging, the little packaging idea works well. Yeah, no, I agree. I just think that, you know, if I want to relay something. I was chatting to a customer, and I know we've got very little time. I was chatting to a customer this week, and I spoke to them. These are people that are both pro code and, you know, folks that like to tinker and write Azure functions. They didn't have a clue what an environment was. They'd never even heard of one. And then I mean, that's like teaching somebody a word in the Power Platform. So, and then you talk about solutions and show them security roles and everything is just like, doof, doof, doof. So yeah, that's why I like the DFT approach.
I just want to throw.
You've got to remember, we know what we're talking about because we've been in it for years. Bringing someone new into all of that things that come from a totally different world. We talk gobbledygook by mentioning citizen developers, never mind anything else.
And just to force that point home in the last few minutes before I go to Mike and Mark for their closing comments. For me, the beauty, like I look at that from a user first perspective, right? And typically what I find from like citizen developers is usually they're people who are on the user end of the experience. And the difficulty from the user end of the experience is 9 times out of 10, you find yourself on the user end of a system that was made by developers and technical people and is not helpful in you doing your day-to-day job. And that is the difference that the citizen developer brings, is that user first perspective. Hey, this is actually something that helps us to do our job, right? So moving into closing comments.
We haven't gotten to the managed versus unmanaged.
We're not even touching it. We're not even touching it.
We ran out of time. Sorry.
We're not deliberately managed to circumnavigate managed versus unmanaged. And we only mentioned licensing once, so I'm quite happy about that. But Mark and Mike, do you have any closing comments or thoughts that you'd like to leave anybody with? Apart from making fart noises with your eyes, which was the highlight of the whole session.
I'll go first. So I don't think I even mentioned it. So part of the COE starter kit that I may have at the beginning is the ALM accelerator. And that's what I've been working on with Mark and other PowerCat members for the past year and a half. And Mark's been working on it longer than that. But check it out. We just did a release in February. And we've got videos and docs up on Microsoft Docs. You know, it's the idea behind the ALM accelerator is to accelerate people who are starting with ALM from scratch. If you're where Mark is and you've got an organization that got their ALM stuff together. Can I say shit together? I guess I can. But anyway, then it's probably not for you. Might be a good reference. But if you're just starting with ALM, it is a good place to start. So check that out. And that's all open source as well. So you can kind of look at the bits.
Awesome. Mark Cunningham. It sounds like you guys have got some content to share with everybody after this as well, by the sounds of it.
Yeah, sounds like it. But no, I think Mike touches on a good point. Like that is your starting point. And I think that if you're coming into this, you know, you don't get to enterprise in a few days, right? It's a journey. So we shouldn't label it as something that you can just pick up and start tomorrow. You have to go on a journey. You have to change your mindset and you have to get everybody on board from higher up as well, right? It's an organizational change. So yeah, that'd be my takeaway, is think about how you're going to roll this out. If you're new to the game, have a plan and think about your mentality, your approach, who are your audience, because your audience is everything in this day and age, and that should govern where you go with it.
That's a great point. It's very much a mindset thing, right? It's sorry, Mark, you wanted to.
So Mark, you made a really great point that scares the heck out of us as the team that builds the ALM accelerator, right? It is an evolution, right? There's a maturity model to getting to a level of ALM that doesn't happen overnight. And we're actually worried that the unintended consequence of our accelerator is it gives people the impression that you just install our accelerator, you check the box, just like the COE starter kit, you just install it, check the box, and then you magically have a COE and you magically have ALM. Like, we don't think that. We just built it because we know it takes most people years to build the level of infrastructure you built, we built, etc. right? And so we just want to share that with the world, warts and all, candidly, right, to help them. So I'd love feedback on how we can do a better job. To your point, making sure people understand you don't just install anybody's accelerator and magically you're an ALM expert on the platform, right?
Right.
Very cool. Well, we've run out of time. I feel like we could have done Power Platform virtual happy hour and a half, but we'll call it time of death at 8:01. If you would like to get in touch with Mike or Mark, hopefully the contacts are on screen for you now. Thank you so much to both of our guests, and also for Mark Schweiger joining us as well, and chucking in his 2 cents, as they say. And if you would like to hang around for a further chat, we'll stop the recording. Oh, yes, sorry, Carla, completely forgot. How poor of me. Join myself and Chris Huntingford and Carl Cookson on the Microsoft UK Tech Community Day on the 17th of Feb, where we'll be talking about all of you behind your back. So you might as well come and see what we say.
Yeah, just a Microsoft event they've not actually broadcast, so it's actually happening next week. All to do with the communities that are in the UK and what we do, and how and a technical topic. So we're talking about governance, I believe, Chris.
Yeah.
So that'll be.
Oh, I thought it was going to be licensing. Oh,
well,
disappointing.
it will
I
become
love it. I love a licensing
Love it. I'm gonna have to re-dye my hair, aren't I, for that? So I match the picture. Christ.
Yeah.
Thanks very much.
Best picture, so yeah. Thank you all.
Thanks very much.
I'm going to stop recording now, and then I'll open up if anyone wants to chat.